He knew this world wasn't made for the poor. His name was Arthur, the son of a laborer who had died years ago in a coal mine. His mother was ill and unable to work, and his little sister was always crying from hunger. They lived in a small wooden house that was more like a shack. At night, Arthur had to share a worn-out blanket with his sister to keep from freezing. But these weren't the worst parts of his life. The worst part was being humiliated. When he worked as a street vendor in the market, he was often mocked by shopkeepers and customers. One of the butchers always laughed at him and said, "Boy, you'll always be poor. Some people are made for money, and some, like you, are made for hunger." But Arthur had something in his heart that no one could take away, a dream bigger than himself. Hard days, harder nights. Every day before sunrise, he left home to find work. He carried loads, fetched water, cleaned shops. But even after a hard day, the money he earned was only enough to buy a loaf of bread. Some days, they didn't even have that. But he always had one habit, listening to the rich people talk. When he worked in the market, he would linger near the conversations of the merchants, listening to every word they said. He learned how they talked about prices, trade, and deals. Little by little, he learned how the world worked. One night, as he was returning home, he saw something that changed his destiny, a gold coin lying on the ground. He could have spent it on food, but he didn't. The first investment. With that coin, he went to the market the next morning and bought a few kilos of apples from a farmer. Then he sold them one by one and doubled his initial capital. It was the first time he felt he could make money move, not just for survival, but for growth. He repeated this several times. Each time he increased his capital a little more. But this was just the beginning, falling and rising again. One day, when he had managed to buy a lot of goods, a group of wealthy dealers noticed him. They were furious that a poor boy was entering their market. So they decided to get rid of him. One of them, with one swift move, threw all his goods on the ground and said to him, "This isn't your place, kid. The poor should stay poor." Arthur returned home that night without any money, without any hope, and with tears in his eyes. The snow was still falling. Arthur walked through the dark and silent streets of the city. His legs were shaking, but not just from the cold, but from anger and helplessness. His goods, all the capital he had gathered with hard work, were now crushed in the mud of the street. The people who had bought from him moments ago now passed by indifferently. Some even shook their heads with a contemptuous look, as if they had predicted his failure. He felt like the world had come to an end. Were they right? Should the poor stay poor? He barely made it home. His mother, seeing him with red eyes and frozen hands, said nothing, just put the blanket over his shoulders. But Arthur couldn't take it anymore. For the first time in his life, he accepted defeat. He sat in silence all night, staring at a spot on the wall and thinking. In his mind, the merchant's voice still echoed, "This isn't your place, kid. The poor should stay poor." Suddenly, in the middle of the night, while he was still awake, there was a loud knock on the door. His mother opened the door in terror, and a man in a long black cloak entered the house. It was the mayor of the city. The man looked at Arthur, then silently took a bag from his pocket and placed it on the table. The sound of gold coins clinking together broke the silence of the house. "This is your compensation. I was in the market today and saw everything. That merchant has broken the law many times, but no one dared to complain. But you worked, you earned your keep, and they took it from you. This money belongs to you." Arthur still couldn't believe it, but before he could say anything, the mayor continued, "But remember, this money is just a help. The important thing is how you use it. If you spend it, nothing will change. If you invest it, maybe one day no one will be able to humiliate you again." Then, without another word, he closed the door and left. Arthur looked at the bag of gold. His hands were still shaking, but this time not from anger, but from excitement. This was an opportunity that only comes once in a lifetime. He didn't sleep that night until dawn. He reviewed all his plans, made a map, and decided that from that moment on, he would never give up again. The next day, he returned to the market, but this time, not with fear, but with eyes full of courage. With the same money, he bought more goods. This time, he sold not in one place, but in several different places, so that others could not easily eliminate him. And this was the starting point of his transformation. The path to wealth. Years passed. He learned how to negotiate with merchants, how to identify opportunities, and how to secretly grow his capital. Until, at the age of 25, he was no longer that poor boy. He was now the owner of a large business. He not only became one of the richest men in the city, but gradually expanded his business to other cities. He bought ships, traded goods between countries, and became one of the greatest merchants in Europe. The message of the story: Arthur had no capital, he had no support, no one believed in him, but he had something more valuable than gold, a big dream and an indomitable will. If he could go from nothing to everything, then so can you.